Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 174, cover dated October 1993. So this is in the era of the Chris Claremont and Paul Smith run on the comic, and we've got a cover here by Paul Smith, and it's a pretty striking one of, now it's revealed, Jason Wyngarde holding in his hands Scott and Madelyne. And very clearly here, Madelyne is wearing an engagement ring. So this is the issue in which Scott and Madelyne get engaged. And interesting technique as well, like art technique of the period. So we have a color hold here around the only black ink line image on the cover, that of Scott and Madelyne. And it's quite effective here. And I would say that this one is colored by Glynis Oliver, or Wine, as she was at the time. So let's open this one up to the first page, and the title of the story is Romances, and this is a pretty much a quiet issue focusing on the relationships among various X-Men and supporting characters of the comic. And the creative team is Chris Claremont as ever writer, Paul Smith penciler, Bob Wiacek inker, Glynis Wine colorist, and Tom Orzechowski letterer. So a nice establishing shot here of the Starjammer ship, and we have Scott and Madelyne out at one of the windows observing an Earthrise, and it's the first time Madelyne has seen that, and so she's shedding tears of joy at the beauty that she's witnessing. And you know, it almost goes without saying, but I'll say it nonetheless, excellent work here by Paul Smith, who's at the top of his game at this point. And in my opinion, he's using Duo Shade here. Duo Shade was an ink that could be applied with an agent that would leave the color light gray or dark. And I think he's using that here on the planet Earth here, indicating like clouds and land masses and so on and so forth. And quite effective. And I like the way that we zoom in. There's this tiny speck here at the tip of my finger is Scott and Madelyne looking out in at the Earthrise, and then we zoom in, and then we're right in on Scott hugging Madelyne and wiping the tear from our eye. It's nice storytelling. And then of course turn the page and they kiss, but who's observing? Well, it's Scott's father, Christopher Summers, Corsair, with his partner, Lady or Mademoiselle Hepzibah, and so they interrupt, and Hepzibah is like kind of getting ideas of her own, kind of getting a bit, if you'll forgive the expression, a bit frisky. And what happens here is that Chris takes Madelyne away for a tour of the Starjammer. And Scott says to Hepzibah, Madelyne's my dream come true. And she says to him, oh, so why I hear doubt in voice, Scott boy. Easy to talk, caring, loving, far harder to share blood. You die for her, Scott boy, or she for you, like Corsair did long ago for me. So there's a little explanation of that. And this is something that Scott is working through in this issue. His love and passion for Madelyne, but also his doubts about her, because she's a spitting image of Jean Grey. And of course there's the mystery as to how Madelyne was the sole survivor of a plane crash at the exact same moment that Jean Grey killed herself on the moon in order to prevent the re-emergence of Dark Phoenix. Also, we have this moment here with Binary, Carol Danvers, on the bridge of the Starjammer, and Binary left Professor X's mansion in issue 171 because of Professor X's decision to take in Rogue and help her with her powers and her problems dealing with her permanent absorption of Carol Danvers' powers as Ms. Marvel, her invulnerability and ability to fly, but also her psyche and memories. So Carol has made the decision as Binary to join up with the Starjammers and leave our galaxy. And so she says here, much as I'd like otherwise, there's no place left for me on Earth. No one I truly care for. Deep space is where Binary was born. That's where she'll make her home. So Scott asks his father, when will you leave? And Chris says, fairly soon, I'm afraid, and I can't say when or even if we'll be back. When last we spoke, you mentioned coming with us. Still interested? And of course with Madelyne there, he doesn't know anymore because Madelyne has just really entered into his life and they've had something of a whirlwind romance. So he's faced with a choice of following his father into deep space or doing something different and making a new life with Madelyne Pryor. So then we have this interesting scene with Professor X. Professor X is in a new body following the recent Brood saga. But he hasn't regained, even though there's apparently nothing, or there shouldn't be anything physically wrong with his new body, he isn't able to walk very well. So he's been going through this process of rehabilitation and training with Lilandra helping and supervising. And they're trying to get to the bottom, or she's trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with his legs. She says, this final scan confirms my suspicions. The problem is physical in origin. And Professor X asks, can it be corrected? Will I at last be able to walk? And she says, yes, I believe so. I only wish I could stand beside you on that happy day. And why is that? Why can't she stay with him? Well, this is it. She says, we've received further word from Shi'ar. Since my sister, that's Deathbird, seized my throne, civil war now seems inevitable. Deathbird is quite mad. I cannot leave the Empire in her hands, any more than I can abandon those who have already raised my standard against her. I must return, Charles, and soon. So are these lovers going to be star-crossed in separation? And Professor X can't go with her as he feels or thinks, because he says, my duty, my responsibility to both X-Men and New Mutants is as strong as yours to your Empire. They're so young, Lil, he says to her. And the dangers they face grow more terrible with each passing day. And in addition, he's concerned about Scott and Madelyne. So duty, obligations on both halves, keeping these two lovers, are potentially going to keep them apart. So then they have a little bit of conversation about the physical resemblance between Madelyne and Jean Grey. And Professor X is coming to the opinion the physical likeness may be no more than cruel coincidence compounded by our own fears and fantasies. So Lilandra concurs by saying she prays it is, and then they kiss. And she says that they deserve their happiness as much as Scott and Madelyne do. And maybe this is a good point to talk about that Chris Claremont's original intention in relation to Madelyne Pryor was that it was just a coincidence that she looked like Jean Grey. This is long in advance of the editorial mandated rebirth of Jean Grey and the creation of X Factor. So long before that, that was his original intention, that what Professor X there reckons was indeed the case, pure coincidence. Now we have Scott on the Starjammer thinking through his options and working over his concerns about Madelyne being a sole survivor from a plane crash at the instant that Jean Grey died on the moon, as he puts it. Well, Jean Grey killed herself on the moon. And he's interrupted by Madelyne. And she says to him, you look so sad, Scott, been talking to ghosts. They were of you, Red, as always. No, sorry, he says here, I do from time to time, can't really help myself. The people from my flight, I tried to explain. Sorry, she's saying this. She's saying that she occasionally talks from time to time to ghosts. This is interesting. She's got this survivor's guilt here, how she talks to people on the flight, tries to explain, to apologize, and occasionally she screams, so many dead, even though it wasn't my fault. I blame myself, I can't forget, but I also can't let them control my life. Same goes for you. And my ghosts, he asks, one in particular, not your usual sort of romantic rival, you must admit. No real rival at all, sweetheart, he says. Of course, the ghost of Jean Grey. And so she brings up the offer that Chris made, Cyclops. Please don't hold back on my account, she says. And then he says to her, suppose I ask you to come with me. And then they kiss in front of the moon. And I really like the aesthetic choice here to render in the space background with the stars just by this kind of sweeping brush strokes, and then probably flicking over that some white ink to give that depiction of the stars. It's nicely done, and it brings us back to the opening page again. So then we switch to Japan, northern Japan, the ancestral seat of Clan Yashida, and we're picking up from the end of the previous issue where Mariko called off the wedding with Wolverine. He's rightly angry, and he's arrived at the ancestral seat of Clan Yashida, and he calls out and demands that Mariko talk to him. So she commands the samurai under her control to lay down their weapons, that she'll have no bloodshed in her house. And Wolverine asks her, "We were to be married. You swore you loved me with all your heart, but on our wedding day, you called it off. Why?" And so she says, "As I told you then, you are not worthy." "That's not good enough," he says. And she says, "Is the only answer you deserve, murderer of my father." So he killed her father, who was a crime lord, in issue 4 of the Wolverine Limited series, created by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller. And at the end of that, she presented him with Clan Yashida's honor sword, the samurai sword he's brought with him. And he says, "Do you remember this blade? You gave it to me, the honor sword of Clan Yashida. For 800 years it has represented all you are and wish to be, the spiritual and physical perfection we strive for, to be worn not by the lord of the clan, but by the samurai who best exemplifies those qualities. If I'm not worthy of you, lady," he says, "I'm not worthy of it," as he throws it into the ground. So then Mariko asks her half-brother, Keniuchio Harada, to retrieve the blade and restore it to its proper resting place, which he does. And then he can't resist mocking Wolverine. He says, "I've won, little Gaijin. All my past crimes are forgiven. Mariko has named me heir, her heir. You have nothing. You are nothing." And then she delivers the coup de grace. "Wolverine, my love, is for a man, not a beast clad in human form. Leave my sight, my house, my land forever." And he walks off. So really getting stabbed in the heart, and then a twisting of the knife too. And then we go back to Earth, and well, still on Earth, but North America and Professor X's mansion. And we've got Kitty Pryde here. It's 1983, and she's reading an issue of Marvel Comics published Star Wars, enjoying it and having fun with her dragon Lockheed as well. And then she decides that she wants to show the comic to Peter, who's in his room and frustrated with his art. So he's having trouble with a painting he's working on. He says here, "It's not right. There are feelings, perceptions I wanted so badly to convey. They're in my head, clear as crystal, but hard as I try, I cannot get them into my hands or onto this canvas. It is very frustrating." So I always like that way that Claremont gave Peter that additional aspect to his character, that he is an artist at heart, and only accidentally in some ways a warrior for Xavier's X-Men. So Kitty drags him away, says that some playtime will do us both good, and she has a surprise for him. So what is it? So she's been working with the professor on developing her powers, but first of all she tells him to close his eyes, and then she leaps into his arms and hits him with a snog, or a smacker on the lips, and then they almost hit up against the wall there, and she's blushing, he's blushing. That's nicely done by Glynis Wine Oliver. A little blush on Peter's cheek there, and then we do get to this new thing that the surprise she wants to show him, which is he's got to close his eyes again, and then she's using her power to using her phasing power to affect Peter as well as her, and he's got Peter walking on air and through the floor of Aurora's attic. So she's delighted, but she has to concentrate or things could get messy, right? She doesn't want Peter materializing in the middle of the floor. And so he opens his eyes and he finds himself aloft, and then they fall down, and Then she's moving in again for another kiss, but outside at that moment, they're interrupted by Aurora in her new biker leathers and with her mohawk hairdo. So she arrives into, it is her attic loft, just when Peter and Kitty are kissing. And so she surprises them. And Kitty says, I'm so embarrassed I could die. Maybe if I could phase and run. But Peter tells her, don't you dare. And she says, they didn't expect Aurora back soon. I figured we'd take care of your plants, but they're not there. So the attic loft, which has always been a space for Aurora's plants, are gone. All her plants are gone. And she says, by way of explanation, as I've changed, little one, I've changed my home to match. So that's interesting aspect of, Claremont working out what Aurora would do in her new kind of character guise. And then we switch scenes to another room in the X Mansion. It's revealed to be Jean Grey's old room, and Rogue is convalescing after the injuries she sustained from putting herself in front of Viper's blaster in the previous issue in order to protect Wolverine and Mariko in particular. And so when she asks about it being Jean Grey's room, she also asks, what's the deal with everyone being so skittish whenever you talk about Scott's new girlfriend, just because she looks like Jean? So then Nightcrawler explains and gives Rogue a potted history of Jean Grey, Phoenix and Dark Phoenix, and by way of that also catching up any new readers on that history, and it's going to come in handy a little later on in the issue. So then he makes his way into his own room and wishes to himself that Amanda, that's Amanda Sefton, were here. That's his air hostess, sorceress girlfriend, and he finds a gift from her, and it is a doll of her, kind of like dressed as a witch and on a broomstick. And the note reads, excellent lettering by Tom Orzechowski, of course. I know you'll prefer the real thing, darling, but XXX, like kisses and hugs, Amanda. And this is after Nightcrawler gave Amanda a doll of himself, the Banff doll. And later on, so Scott has chosen Madelyne and not to go into the stars with his father on the Starjammer. And so both of them are aboard a North Star Airways flight bound for Anchorage, and that's the company that Madelyne flies for. And this is where we learn that he's proposed to her and she's accepted, and she's wearing an engagement ring. So interesting choice that we don't get to see Scott's proposal on the page. Instead, it's happened in between when we last saw them and when we pick up with them again here on the flight. So Scott says to Madelyne, whatever happens, I wanted you to know how I felt. And she replies, it's mutual, sweetheart, till death do us part. She's done a lot of crying in this issue, but out of joy rather than anything else. So he goes back to check on the passengers, and as he's walking down the aisle, he seems to have dropped something, and this kindly looking priest picks it up for him. He says, sorry to bother you, lad, but I believe you dropped this as you passed. And so it turns out to be a photograph, and it's of Jean Grey, from her visit to Greece just before her transformation to Dark Phoenix. And he thinks to himself, it's not mine. How did it get here, and why now? And again, look, I like this technique in the background, the blacked in, the black ink inked in with brush. It's nice to make the Polaroid pop. And so Scott now has doubts. He thinks to himself, has the whole world gone crazy, or is it only me? I thought I had things all sorted out, but now I'm more confused and scared than ever. And the priest here, with something of a sinister grin on his face, thinks, poor boy, looks like he's just kicked in the gut. Better get used to it, sonny, because there's more to come. So who is this? Well, eagle-eyed long-time readers of Uncanny X-Men would recognize this as one of Mastermind's guises. one he used in the run-up to the Dark Phoenix saga when he was working on Jean Grey and seducing her to quote-unquote the dark side. So back in the cockpit, Scott rejoins Madelyne, and she recognizes that there's something up with him. Are you okay? She asks him. You still want to get together tonight? And he says, are you kidding? This is a celebration I wouldn't miss for the world. So we'll see how it all turns out. So that evening they arrive at their home, and Madelyne is thinking that something's wrong with Scott, but he won't tell her what. And she thinks here it's probably nerves on both our parts. And then she talks out loud, engaged, can you believe it? And soon to be married, will wonders never cease? I hope Scott's ready and he's as good a cook as he says, because I'm starved. But outside the house and listening is this figure. And we saw him, but in a more obscured panel, just focused on the tip of his nose and mouth, lighting up a cigarette in the previous issue when he had a meeting with Mariko. And here, long-time readers will recognize this as Jason Wyngarde. Again, a persona, an alter ego of Masterminds. And so we're putting it together that he's manipulated Mariko to repudiate the marriage with Wolverine. And here he is about to interfere in another prospective marriage, that of Madelyne and Scott Summers. So he laughs malevolently, triumphantly, but Madelyne doesn't hear it as she walks up the stairs. And so this is a really nicely laid out page as well. So she says she's home, she's brought some sparkling wine, and Scott there says that he's been thinking and he needs an answer to a very important question. And he says, I've been wrestling with this all day, and he has, trying to explain away my doubts and fears, telling myself I'm being a fool, but it's no good. I can't, I have to know. Are you the reincarnation of Jean Grey? Are you Phoenix? So, here we go. He has expressed it aloud to Madelyne, and what's her response? Turn the page, this is brilliant. Wow. A right cross to the jaw, knocks his ruby quartz glasses from his head, and of course he has to find them with his eyes closed. But this is interesting. He can't feel his glasses anywhere. They've gone under a table. Can't waste time looking for them either. And so we learn that he always carries a spare. That's interesting because he didn't have them. He didn't have a spare recently in X-Men Unlimited #1, reviewed recently on the channel, that is, and or Adjectiveless X-Men #23, but he had them here back in 1983, and rather a good thing to have a spare. And so here he is. So now he's got his spare on, and he's going after Madelyne, asking, can we talk please? And then, look, he walks into the darkened room, and he's blasted out of the room, and this face emerges in silhouette, emerges from silhouette. The time for talk, lover, is over. And look at this face, this beak-like nose, and the fire emerging from her eyes. What are we going to have on our final page? There we go. It's Dark Phoenix, or so it would appear. So is Madelyne Pryor indeed the reincarnation of Jean Grey? And or how does Mastermind play into all of this that has been going on? So the promise is it's to be concluded in the next double-sized issue, which is 175. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 174. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.